The word Wetiko, it's a Native American term that connotes, in a way, the spirit of evil, but it's not just the spirit of evil. And one way to conceive of it, it's a mind virus. And people hear a mind virus and it sounds all woo-woo and new agey, but what it actually means is that the origin of the collective madness and the solution of the collective madness that's playing out all over our world is to be found within the psyche. That's what a mind virus means. And that's a no-brainer. How could it be otherwise? Where else is the source of the collective madness to be found except within our minds? So one could also think of it as a mind parasite, as a cancer of the soul, as a psycho-spiritual disease of the soul. And every single spiritual tradition from time immemorial has been pointing at Wetiko just by different names. It's in the apocryphal text, they call it a counterfeiting spirit. It's in Buddhism, it's in Christianity, it's in Islam. Every single creative thinker and visionary artist and writer and philosopher, they're all pointing at Wetiko. And why they're pointing at it is that people don't see it.
Insight and awareness, spiritual explorer. Soul intuitive, emotional and spiritual mentor and award-winning author, Lorraine Nylon.
Welcome, explorers. Today our guest is our author and wounded healer, Paul Levy. And he's written a book, he's written many books, but the book we're going to talk about today is Wetiko, Dispelling Wetiko and Dreaming Wetiko. So can you tell us what Wetiko is and what do we need to know about it?
Yeah, for sure. So the word Wetiko, it's a Native American term that connotes, in a way, the spirit of evil, but it's not just the spirit of evil. And one way to conceive of it, it's a mind virus. And people hear a mind virus and it sounds all woo-woo and new agey, but what it actually means is that the origin of the collective madness and the solution of the collective madness that's playing out all over our world is to be found within the psyche. That's what a mind virus means. And that's a no-brainer. How could it be otherwise? Where else is the source of the collective madness to be found except within our minds? So one could also think of it as a mind parasite, as a cancer of the soul, as a psycho-spiritual disease of the soul. And every single spiritual tradition from time immemorial has been pointing at Wetiko just by different names. It's in the apocryphal text, they call it a counterfeiting spirit. It's in Buddhism, it's in Christianity, it's in Islam. Every single creative thinker and visionary artist and writer and philosopher, they're all pointing at Wetiko. And why they're pointing at it is that people don't see it. In other words, it operates through the unconscious blind spots of our psyche. And so it's a form of blindness, but it's a very peculiar form of blindness because it actually, the person afflicted doesn't know they're blind and they actually think they're sighted. And not only that, they think they're more sighted than people who actually see. So what Wetiko does, it operates through, and it's like a vampire. It operates through the projective tendencies of the mind so that we bewitch ourselves. Because the ultimate fact is that each of us, on the one hand, what's going on in the world, we feel helpless, and there's truth to that. What can any one person do? And the actual reality is that each one of us have this enormous, unimaginably vast creative power at our disposal each and every moment. And to the extent that we're not accessing consciously our creativity, the Wetiko mind virus plugs into our own creative impulse because it has no creativity. It's a master impersonator. That's why the apocryphal text calls it the counterfeiting spirit. It actually mimics us and impersonates us, puts us on and fools us. And then if we identify with its false version, like Jung was saying, the greatest danger facing our species is to identify with a fictitious identity. That's what Wetiko does. It offers us a limited identity. Oh, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized. As soon as we hold that viewpoint, being like a dream, we will draw all the evidence confirming the seeming objective truth of our viewpoint, such that we then, in a literal way, entrance ourselves. We hypnotize ourselves by our own unconscious creative agency, and that's Wetiko. Now, if people hear about a mind virus and they get all afraid, no, Wetiko doesn't even exist. It has no independent existence whatsoever from its side. In the same way that a vampire can't exist without something to feed off of. Well, Wetiko has no independent existence at all, and yet Here's the paradox: it can kill us. What that's pointing at is the incredible creative genius that each of us have and that each of us are, but we don't know it. Okay. And so if you think about what I'm describing here, you see, Wetiko can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving it away. So it then, we then identify with who we're not. We actually disconnect and forget who we actually are. Then we disassociate from our creative agency. That's Wetiko in a nutshell, and that's a recipe for madness. So what I'm saying is that affliction, which exists in potential in the collective unconscious of humanity, which is to say that any or all of us could fall prey to it at any moment when we just act out our unconscious, that's the malady. We have the diagnosis of what's afflicting our species. And whether you call it Wetiko or there are a zillion different names for it, but this is what is playing out worldwide via all the evil and the destruction. We are literally committing suicide. We're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of our planet. And that's inspired by this mind virus. But what I'm pointing out in my work is that this mind virus is quantum in nature, which means just like light, is it a wave or a particle? Well, it's in a superposition of states, and how it manifests, wave or particle, depends how it's observed. Wetiko, being quantum, contains the deepest evil imaginable and the most highest sublime blessing. It's helping us to wake up. It's catalyzing the evolution of our species. How it will manifest? Will it take us down? Will it wake us up? That depends if we recognize what it's revealing to us. Wetiko is a revelation, but instead of the revelation of the deity coming, from on high, from the heavens through light, it's actually emerging through the darkness. So I point out in my work that light doesn't just illumine darkness. Light is actually revealed through the darkness. This is very Kabbalistic, not just Kabbalistic. Every wisdom tradition talks about this. This is what I'm trying. You see, Wetiko, as long as we don't see it, it has power over us. But once we begin to see how it operates in the world and in our unconscious reactions and in our mind, then all of a sudden we take away its power and we become empowered. That's what my work is about.
Right. So let's see if we can clarify this a little bit, because that's a lot for people to take on board. Like, like if our listeners are sitting there going, they've never heard of it before, that's a lot to absorb in
Right.
one shot. So do you refer to it as a collective energy that mankind has created? Or is it okay. So
So Wetiko, it's a dreamed up phenomena. We are, you see, how I realized this over 40 years ago, due to incredible deep suffering and trauma, and I went so inwards that I had this life transforming spiritual awakening in which I began to recognize that we're having a dream. We're having a collectively shared dream. We're dreaming up this universe moment by moment. And this is what quantum physics has empirically proven. So Wetiko is a dreamed up phenomena. Another way of describing Wetiko, it's a collective psychosis. This is why Jung was saying one of the other great dangers facing our species is for, just billions of us, millions, billions, whatever, to fall into a psychic epidemic and act out their unconscious in a destructive way. That's exactly what's happening. That's Wetiko. It's a collective psychosis that all of us are made sick by, but we're actually dreaming up. We are actually the dreamers. And, but what I'm pointing out is that it's actually showing us something. It's actually giving us a gift. It can catalyze our awakening to who we are. It can help us to remember our nature and to see the dreamlike nature of reality and to unlock our creative genius. That's what this is about. But if we don't have the recognition of what Wetiko is revealing to us, it's going to kill us.
Yeah, actually, it makes sense to me because it's like when I'm looking at, I work with clients mainly from sexual abuse. So they've got a lot of trauma, narcissistic relationships, and people that are trying to really understand their own sense of self, so spirituality. And what just sort of for our listeners is that if you think you're not impacted by collective energy, look at how many trends you jump on. Look how many fashions you wear. And that's because that is what is around you. So if you walk into supermarkets, I know I'm going left field on you, but I'm just trying to get them to understand how energy impacts us. So if you walk into a supermarket, into a shopping centre, and if you look at all the fashions, there's a theme there. And we all start operating from that theme. We all start wearing those sort of clothes. And that's what you're saying this mind virus can do. It can have us all operating from the same sort of themes. And it can bring out the worst in us, but that also lets us really identify that's the shadow, that's the emotional baggage that we have. So we can find, it can actually be an assistant to us finding what's unresolved within ourselves. Does that?
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, I think of like what's been happening with whether the pandemic or the war in Ukraine or just the incredible entrancement or entrainment, particularly that's coming through the mainstream media, where people then, imbibe the propaganda and they just parrot, what the powers that be want them to say, all the while thinking they're in possession of the truth and they've actually been brainwashed. And so, I point out that the real war is the war on consciousness that's been going on for a long time. And that's why, to get in touch with our nature, you see, the greatest protection against this mind virus is to get in touch with our nature, and what is our nature? It's such a cliche. Oh, just get in touch with your true nature. Well, our true nature, by its very nature, is creative. So when we have the realization of our nature, we embody and express ourselves creatively. And the more we embody and express ourselves creatively, the more we deepen the realization of our nature. It becomes a positive feedback loop that's kryptonite to Wetiko. It's the greatest protection against Wetiko. But when we're not in touch with our nature, with who we are, then instead of seeing through our own eyes, it's not like we see through other people's eyes. No, we see through how we imagine other people see us.
Yeah,
and
true.
then we've outsourced our own authority and we've disconnected from ourselves. And then then we've unwittingly become a minion and an outpost for Wetiko to act itself out through us.
Yeah, that makes sense. See, I refer to it as controlled evolution energy. So when you have thoughts and beliefs and fears and just your perception of yourself, if it is negative and anti being the creator of your own life, like not taking responsibility for yourself, not taking accountability for your actions and things like that, all of a sudden you stop your own path for evolution. And you'll find some sort of low, if you want to call them low vibrational energies, such as jealousy. It can be any of the seven deadly sins, because we know those ones. But that desire also to be in control, the illusion of having control over your own life and your emotions. And the more you think you're in control, generally the more out of control you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like that image of the little kid sitting in the car with a toy steering wheel and the passenger seat dashboard, and they're steering the wheel thinking they're driving the car. That's like us thinking we're controlling things. No, it's not like that. Like people who say to me, "Oh, I have lucid dreams and then I completely control the dream." That tells me that they don't know what they're talking about. They're not really having a lucid dream, because why in the world would you control the dream that you've woken up in, which is your own energy? No, you wouldn't control out there. You would just control your inner reactions. You would be in control of yourself. Okay. And so the thing about Wetiko, this I think is important. One way to understand the profundity of and I'm just a translator. It's not like I've discovered anything. I'm just translating this ancient indigenous wisdom into modern psychological spiritual language. Just imagine you're in a dream, right? And what is a dream? But it's a reflection of the mind. Imagine you're holding a viewpoint in the dream. The dream, being a reflection of the mind, has no choice but to instantaneously, outside of time, reflect back the viewpoint you're holding, because the dream is nothing other than your own mind. So then all of a sudden you have evidence confirming the seeming objective truth of your viewpoint. So you become more fixed in your viewpoint, thinking you're seeing clearly. The more fixed and entrenched you become in your viewpoint, the more the dream, which is nothing other than a projection of your mind, gives you evidence and confirms the seeming reality and objective reality of your viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a feedback loop whose origin is within your own mind. And guess what? What I'm describing, you've just hypnotized yourself by your own creative genius. That's Wetiko. You see? So what I'm saying is that we have this enormous, incredible creative power. That's why being creative is the medicine for Wetiko. But to the extent that we're not, consciously expressing it, then this mind virus plugs into it and turns our own creative genius against us in a way that feeds it.
So, and what do we feed it with?
We feed it with our life force, with our energy. That's why I call, I just describe Wetiko in as many ways as I can imagine. And one way is that it's like a vampire, that it actually has no intrinsic life of its own. Like I'm saying, it doesn't even exist, but it develops a pseudo life because it feeds off of our life force. It's very much like when you get in a relationship with a vampiric figure and you feel drained when you hang out with them. Yeah, what's happening energetically? They're feeding off of you like you're a food source or you're a battery, and they're getting energized. And so many people have experienced that just, in abusive relationships or stuff like that, and that's a way of describing Wetiko. You see, because people hear this idea of a mind virus and it sounds so abstract or theoretical. No, it's real life, mundane, everyday reality. One of the major, if not the major, sort of channels that Wetiko works through is relationships. All of a sudden, you're in a harmonic, loving, good relationship, friendship, lover, whatever, and then all of a sudden, something gets in between you, and you misunderstand each other, or you feel hurt, or you feel separate, or you break up, or you demonize each other. There are projections. You feel not seen. That's Wetiko behind the scenes. It's feeding off of the separation, because
Yeah,
Wetiko is the separate self. As soon as I identify with the separate self, that is the fictitious identity. As soon as I identify with the separate self, then you're an other. As soon as you're an other, there's fear. Fear is the superfood for Wetiko. That's why the way to see through the best protection for Wetiko is connecting with your nature. What is your nature? Your nature is that we don't exist as separate selves. We are interdependent and interconnected. And to see that, that's to actually begin to connect with who we actually are. And the realization of that, the energetic expression of that is compassion, is love. That's our nature. And that's the kryptonite to Wetiko.
yeah, and I get that because I talk a lot with people about their separation from the truth of themselves. So the core of their being, which you will find, kindness, compassion, all those kind of energies in there, but with understanding. When you actually really understand who you are, you understand the types of energies you operate with. When you're unconscious, you don't understand the energies that you're working with. So you can be acting out your jealousy, and it's taking you to all these different layers and all these different belief systems that you're running. And I'm presuming what you're saying is Wetiko comes into there and plays with that energy, because my understanding is that it can't give you anything you haven't got. So, and if it and the way I've sort of explained it to people is, if you walk into a room and everybody's, there's half a dozen people sitting around judging, and you walk in and you go, I don't want to judge. I don't want to be part of the gossip mill that's happening here. And all of a sudden you find you're starting to tap in and you're starting to agree, and then you're starting to put your judgment in there, and it becomes this judgment frenzy. So you've walked in with an intent, but because that judgment energy is around, and jealousy and all those kind of things, nastiness and all the rest of it, then you've ended up being absorbed into that energy, and then you've acted out your version of that. So that's what I think. My
Yeah. Well, what
understanding.
you're describing, I mean, it's very much like the mind virus is contagious, but in this similar way, when somebody actually awakens to their nature and is able to stabilize that and is able to embody that, that frequency is likewise contagious, and that can go viral. And
Yeah,
particularly that person embodies, like, I think of my teachers being an incredibly loving, kind, compassionate, wisdom filled person who's just completely in the moment and creative. People who hang out with people like that it's infectious. They catch the bug of being compassionate and loving and creative, and that can go viral. And So, what I'm pointing at is that encoded in this mind virus, you see, the thing about this mind virus, it's important to understand, and it's so profound. I mean, that's why I've written 3 books about it, is that it's an inner disease of the soul that actually has a magical ability to extend itself out into the world and somehow synchronistically express itself via outer events. So think about what I'm just describing. The outer world and outer events in the external world are somehow expressing and revealing the state, the inner state of the human psyche. That is just like a dream. And that's why recognizing the dreamlike nature of reality is the very thing, is the very way that when you sort of stabilize that perspective, that's then Wetiko has no currency on you. Okay. It's only
Yeah.
when we think this is, oh, I exist as a reference point in third dimensional space and time and as a separate self, which means if I think I exist as a subject, as an ego, then guess what? I think the world exists as an object separate from me. And this is what quantum physics, that's why I wrote a book about quantum physics, saying quantum physics is offering us the medicine to dispel Wetiko. Because in essence, quantum physics is saying it's proven there's no such thing as an objective world or an objective anything. That's just an idea in our head with no correlate in reality. Quantum physics has empirically proven that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed, which means that the act of observation is creative, just like a dream. We're not passively observing a universe that's separate from us. No, we are participating in invoking the very universe we're observing. Now, think about that. Quantum physics is saying there's no objective world. Well, wait a second. I thought I was a subject. As a subject, I need an object to be in a relationship to be a subject. If there's no object, what happened to me as a subject? In other words, quantum physics is shedding light on who are we? We don't exist in the way we've been imagining we do if we imagine we exist as a reference point, as an ego, as a separate self. Okay, because the sense of an objective world and the sense of a subjective, inner perspective reciprocally reinforce each other. That's an illusion creating an illusion, and that can go on forever. That's Wetiko. What I'm pointing out is just seeing through that and realizing, oh my God, that's the illusion that I've been living my life from. Who I'm actually discovering I am is I'm actually interconnected with everything. And we all are. And the expression of that is love and compassion. That's the answer. That's what this is all about. And if we don't realize that, then we're doomed because we're going to continually be fated to destroy ourselves.
Yeah, which we seem to be experts at. You know what I mean? Anyone sitting at home that realizes they've got negative self-beliefs, that's a destructive force because you start feeding back into yourself your own anti who you naturally are.
Absolutely. No, that's the thing. Like, if I feel like my wound coming up, and then I interpret that like, oh, well, clearly I'm a wounded person, or else my wound wouldn't be coming up. Well, then I'm like conjuring myself up to have all the evidence being dreamlike. Just the universe will give me all the evidence confirming my viewpoint that I'm wounded. And then I've unknowingly, participated in creating myself in this limited, traumatized, wounded identity instead of when the wound comes up, if you're awake, having a realization, oh, this is a wisdom display of my own mind. This is my wound just being liberated. It's actually revealing to me even more deeply my nature. How wonderful, how amazing that the wound is actually helping me to wake up even further. Then instead of like conjuring myself up in this limited, wounded, traumatized identity, I've actually even more deepened my realization. You see, that's the alchemy. And that's what each one of us is really asked to really, to deepen.
So, and the only way to convert that wound into what I would refer to as wisdom and understanding would be to hit it with all your honesty that you have at that point.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, here is, because by talking about the wound, I think the biggest chapter in my new book is about the shaman, and the shaman is the wounded healer. And I point out, I finished this chapter weeks before the lockdown, because I was pointing out, wow, we as a species are going through a death rebirth experience. I didn't realize how prescient I was being, because then we got locked down and even, more descended into the darkness of the underworld. But the shaman is equivalent to the wounded healer, and a wounded healer is somebody who suffers an incurable wound. And I think of me, my whole process started from getting unbelievably traumatized and wounded. The story isn't important. And for years, I was committed to, I'm going to heal this wound and do everything I can to get rid of it. And then at a certain point, I began to realize, wait, what if it never goes away? And then I began to realize, I can carry the wound in such a way that it becomes a portal or a doorway so I can access my creative gifts. And that, in essence, because the shaman is the creative artist, the shaman is the storyteller, they're the dreamer, okay? And what I'm pointing out is that that's the major archetype that's activated in the collective unconscious of our species, is the shamanic archetype, that we are all being demanded to step in to, stepping into being, a shaman in training, a wounded healer in training. And, I can say a lot more about that, but that's really a very good way of conceptualizing and framing, the deeper process that's informing and giving shape to our world right now.
All right. Well, we'll go to the big question. All the guests get asked this question. What does humanity need to acknowledge and understand for us to evolve?
Yeah. And on the one hand, we need to acknowledge, each one of us, our complicity in the evil that's playing out in the collective body politic, in our own mind, in our relationships, in our community. Okay. We, to the extent that we're unconscious, we are unwittingly recreating and re-traumatizing ourselves and actually victimizing ourselves. We are complicit with our own victimization. So on the one hand, we need to see that. We also need to really come to terms with our own shadow, not just personal, but archetypal shadow. This has to do with a confrontation with the darker side, you could say, of the divine. And, I think of the Kabbalah, who says, the real light emerges from an encounter with evil. So on the one hand, we're being forced. Everyone I know, there's no postponing, there's no more avoiding. It's in our face. We're needing to come to terms with our own darkness. And finally, we need to come to terms with our own light. Interestingly, paradoxically, the more we get in touch with our shadow, the more we're able to access our light and the good parts of us. And because it's so easy, to not just project the shadow out, but project the light out onto, Swamiji or Guruji or whoever, Lama so-and-so. But they're just dream characters. They're reflecting our own light, our own genius. It's time for us to access our own creative genius, okay? Because we are made in the image of our creator. We are creative beings. The greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. And, we're just demanded. And I'm not, painting and drawing, and that's like a flatland version. That's being creative. But the way we go about our day, the way we walk, the way we wash dishes, every moment of our lives is creative. We're interfacing with the creative source of the universe each and every moment. But to the extent that we're unconscious of it, then we're channeling that energy in an unconscious, destructive way. What I'm pointing at is adding consciousness to that, and then stepping into our creative agency and expressing that in a constructive instead of destructive way.
So it's really about understanding yourself and then engaging in your relationship with life and what you're experiencing from that authentic self. But
But it's
understanding,
not only, I would just add, I mean, that's exactly right. But I think of, in the collective works, Jung talks about the whole point of the therapy he developed was to connect people with their inner guide. That there was an inner, he had the experience with Philemon, this being who lived inside of a psyche, who was part of Jung, but was transcendent to Jung, who was teaching Jung stuff that he didn't know. And he realized, oh my God, we all have, he called it the self, which he also equated with the God within, that we have this guide, this, whether you call it the daimon, the genius, the muse, the angel, there are a million different names because it has a miracle quality. It's the part of us that's awake. And he was trying to get his clients to develop an intimate relationship. He called it the ego-self axis, where you actually, it's like developing an intimate relationship with this other person, but it's a wisdom part of you. And it's a reciprocal relationship. You're continually in dialogue and deepening your intimate relationship. That's the way. And he realized encoded in that inner figure was our genius, was our calling, our vocation. It'll help us find our voice. It'll unlock the most sublime creativity. But if we don't connect with that daimon, and the daimon means the inner voice, the guiding spirit, it constellates negatively and becomes a demon. And that's Wetiko.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So I just know that this stuff, when you're talking about it, it overwhelms people. So the more we break it down, and I know, um, when I know you are breaking it down because it's so complex, it's so layered, and it's so intricately in all of the way we think, the way we feel, and all the rest of it. So it becomes this hard thing to identify. And if we just try to identify it as something external to us that is projecting energy at us and we're a victim to it, you'll never understand it. You need to understand that you're doing a dance with it. And the way I explain, I've wrote a lot about controlled evolution energy, which I think is very similar to what you're talking about, is that if you're standing in the presence of something that is extremely indifferent to you, right? It does not care about you. It's just pushing oppositional energy. It's just pushing all that sort of stuff. You are going to come up from your lowest energy. You're going to sometimes match it, but that's how you can find what is in your emotional baggage, so that you can then take that as an opportunity to start getting honest with yourself and start dealing with what you've got stored that links you to that type of energy. And
Yeah, well, it's really interesting what you're saying because on the one hand, this like adversarial, antagonistic energy, you know, I mean, Freud calls it the death instinct, or Jung calls it the morbid part of the personality that has a will to be ill, that there is something in us that's against us, like stepping into our true potential. And the thing which is most interesting is that, well, is it like an alien force that's other, that's not us, or is it just a part of us? Well, the thing, in Buddhism they talk about the ultimate level of reality and the relative level of reality, and you have to honor both. They interpenetrate. So on the absolute level of reality, yeah, this antagonistic force is not separate from you, but on the relative level of reality, we subjectively experience it as if it is other than us, and we have to honor that. That's why Jung was saying objectify the force, give it a shape, give it a form, give it a
yeah,
name. By doing that, you distinguish yourself from it.
yes,
And that's the way he, paradoxically, to have the recognition that it's actually a part of oneself, which is, and that's really what's actually happening. Is that, you see, one way to understand this very simply is with trauma, or like with people who suffer from addiction. Wetiko is completely related to that. If you think about what happens in trauma, we're whole. All of us have been traumatized by being alive. What happens in trauma? We split. We disassociate.
yeah,
Now, if we don't then integrate that split off part, it develops a seeming autonomy of its own, and it will develop a seeming independent life and will of its own that's antagonistic to the ego. In psychological speak, this is called an autonomous complex. The ancients call it a demon. This
yeah,
is exactly what Wetiko is. And think about trauma. We become traumatized. The way we try to heal from the trauma actually creates the trauma we try to heal from in a self-reinforcing feedback loop. That's utter madness. But encoded in that acting out of the repetition compulsion, we're actually trying to experience something consciously. Because at the moment of trauma, we were overwhelmed and we couldn't experience it consciously. So by actually unconsciously recreating it, we're trying to actually consciously experience the very thing we weren't able to experience because it was so overwhelming. The point is that encoded in the pathology of trauma is its own vaccine, is its own medicine. The same way encoded in the Wetiko epidemic that is killing us and that we're participating in killing ourselves, it's actually revealing something to us. Jung says evil has a special purpose, showing us something that it's most important to know. in answer to Job, his greatest work, he says, and I quote, he calls Satan the godfather of humanity as a spiritual being, that the darker forces are actually helping us to wake up and to actualize our freedom and to realize our nature. That's what I'm pointing at. But if we don't realize that, then we're just doomed to continually to unconsciously recreate our trauma, destroy the biosphere, destroy other people, destroy ourselves. And, but encoded in our acting that out, that's the way we're teaching ourselves how to not do that. That's what I'm pointing out again and again.
Yeah, because we're presenting ourselves with the truth of something. So when you've got trauma and you're acting out, trauma morphs. So you disassociate in the trauma because it's overwhelming, like you said. And then if you don't integrate that part of yourself, like what you said, then there's something missing. And then what happens is we try to fill that missing piece. We try to justify our actions. So if for our listeners, if you're doing behavior that doesn't feel right for you, it doesn't feed your soul, it makes you feel less than, makes you feel shame, you're in that separation. You're re-traumatizing yourself with it. So it could be thoughts, it could be fears, it could be belief structures that you've got. And when you don't lean into that, you let that keep manifesting and morphing and morphing and morphing. And I refer to that as soul denial energy, as in that's the energy that you refuse to acknowledge is part of you, but it is not of you. It's not naturally of you. But until you deal with it, it's your energy. You created it. You've got to take ownership of your own
And
creation.
that's Wetiko, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a way of describing when people suffer from addictions. It's, and because, trauma and addiction to me just kind of like, are so equivalent in certain ways. And you see the thing about Wetiko, when we get afflicted by it, and we all potentially have it at any given moment. If I think, oh, you have it and I don't, well, my point of view is showing I'm under the thrall of Wetiko. But if I see, oh, you have it and you're a dream character, you're just reflecting that part of me that has it too. Then all of a sudden I've dispelled the separation, and then I'm having this lucid moment, and then I'm not under the thrall of Wetiko. So the idea being that when people get afflicted by Wetiko, they will actually act out in ways that not only don't serve them, but actually are killing them.
Yeah.
They'll support political candidates, very fanatically, whose, policies will be like hurting them. I mean, it's like what Paul was saying in the Bible is, how come I know what's good for me and I don't do what's good for me, but the stuff I know that harms me, why do I do that? He was describing Wetiko. You see all of these traditions, that's what I talk about in my books. They're all pointing at Wetiko, because the idea is to see how it works, to see how it's actually configuring events in our world. It's informing and giving shape to the insanity of the world crises we're facing. And it's also informing our own unconscious reactions and, and our mind's interpretation. And as long as we stay unconscious of that, then we're offering ourselves, to be the offspring of Wetiko and to be the instrument for Wetiko, all unwittingly. And, I'm just really trying, it's like this. I had a dream once years ago, an incredible dream. And it was the morning that two of my teachers, these great lamas, were coming to visit me, and so I think I was just had a lot of energy. And in the dream, me and my friends, we were all on the lookout for a vampire. And we were actually chanting Bela Lugosi, the actor, I think, who played Count Dracula. And then I see the vampire. And I point him out to my other friends in the dream, and no one else can see him. And then I wake up and I have to go to the airport to pick up my teachers. And I realize that dream has been a meaningful dream because that's like sort of this mythos of my life, and that I've been seeing this. I first saw it in my family. It came through my father. Then I had my awakening, and I was immediately misdiagnosed and thrown in mental hospitals and told, that I'm mentally ill. And, when I knew I was having an awakening, so I never bought into it. But more and more over the years, I've developed more of an articulation or a fluency of pointing at the vampire in a way that other people can see it.
Yeah,
And
good.
I feel like I've really gotten better at that, because the more people see it, the more we take away its power and we become empowered.
Yeah, because it's a camouflaged energy, because everybody justify when you're of when you're I'll just call it negativity, but when you're of negativity, you'll justify negativity. You'll justify being in it, you'll be justify using that energy, you'll let it morph into maybe even darker energy, and you'll justify that, you'll blame, you'll do all sorts of things to justify that position for yourself. And that's empowering the negativity without taking any ownership that that's what you're doing, that you're being negative. And that's
Yeah.
when
No,
I
it's very much, it's like people who are pessimistic about what's happening in the world. And there's overwhelming evidence to be freaked out and pessimistic and feel powerless and feel despair and feel depressed. But as soon as we assume that viewpoint, we're then part of the problem, because then we're gonna we're gonna draw evidence confirming our viewpoint, because this is a dream. And so whatever viewpoint we hold, we actually attract, you know, evidence proving and confirming the seeming objective truth of our viewpoint. So if one of the dangers is to get, too identified and absorbed in pessimistic energy, just like another danger is to get too identified with overly optimistic energy. Oh, God
oh
will take
yeah.
care of everything. No, no, no. We are the dreamers. We are dreaming this up. And what I try to point out is that it's like we're having a recurring dream. And think about a recurring dream. A dream is giving you a message. It's compensatory. It's like, compensating a one-sidedness. It's trying to help you to get back to center. And so if you're off center and you're off balance and you're one-sided, you'll have a dream that's trying to get you back connected to who you are. But if you don't get the message, guess what? Then you have a recurring dream, and even in more amplified form. And again, you'll have a recurring dream until you actually get the message. Well, I'm pointing out, it's like we've had this dream before, this waking dream. We've been here a million times before, where we've developed all this incredible technology, we've tapped into this divine power, created weapons of mass destruction, and we've blown ourselves up again and again and again. And then over like however many billions of years, which in dream time is no time at all, we like recreate, have another recurring dream. And I'm pointing out, this time could be the time that instead of destroying ourselves, sufficiently enough of us wake up so that we can avert the catastrophe that we ourselves are conjuring up, and actually tap into that energy and express it creatively, constructively, with love and compassion.
Yeah, I love that. I just want to jump on one statement. When I see this a lot with clients, is that when you walk into a situation, an event, not everything that's around you is reflecting something back to you about yourself. Because when we're looking at things and we're experiencing things, we're running it through our filter. And that's how we see what we want to see, and we keep feeding that story back to us. Whereas sometimes you can walk into an experience, and if you hold to the truth of yourself, you may see lots of different energies that are negative, operating from places that you don't want to be. And you can objectively observe that, because that's an invitation asking you to jump on board. Like when people are unconscious and they're acting out their emotional baggage, think of it like a merry-go-round, and they're saying, jump on my merry-go-round and come and play. Because I've had a few clients that have held themselves quite well, like they've held to their uniqueness and they've held to the essence of who they are. And then they're beating themselves up because every experience, or not every, the experience that's troubling them is that they're seeing somebody else's negativity and thinking that's constantly reflecting something back that they haven't dealt with. But you can actually observe that type of energy, and it doesn't mean that you need to deal
Well,
with
I would
it.
clarify one thing, that what you're saying that I think might actually help, and that is, and I point this out in my work again and again, is that it's absolutely impossible to see the unconscious playing out in somebody else without your unconscious being activated. In the same way, it's absolutely impossible to see Wetiko playing
Yeah.
out there without your own Wetiko being activated, because it's non-local. So when somebody, like for example, sees, oh, there's unconscious energy and out there, yeah, you cannot, there's no way possibly in the world. You can see that without your unconscious being activated and triggered. But then what an opportunity. What is that in you that just got activated? You know, that's the incredible opportunity to actually expand your awareness and shed light on something that was in your unconscious.
Yeah, and it may not be the same energy as somebody else's that you're observing, because there's this big belief that it's just mirroring. It's a mirror, and you can't
Yeah, but it
identify.
is a mirror. It is a mirror. Christ says, "I am a mirror to those that perceive me." You know, and the mirror is a symbol in every wisdom tradition of our nature. So it all depends what level you're talking at. On one hand, it all is a mirror, and it all is reflecting back. There's nothing other than you. That's the absolute level. But then, yeah, it's important to not take on stuff that doesn't belong to you.
Yes,
And
exactly.
both are true. Both are
Yes,
true.
but exactly. And the point I'm trying to make really is that what I'm seeing is when people say if someone's being nasty to you, right? And yes, you're going to read it from your unconscious because you might go into the victim mode. So that person's not reflecting back to you that you're a nasty person. What you can identify is that when you feel that energy, or when you're on the receiving end of that energy, that you go into your victimhood, and
Right.
that's your
That's
unconscious.
that's true. And they're reflecting back to you the nasty because they're a dream character. Ultimately speaking, there's no separation. If somebody's manifesting in a nasty way, if you say, "Oh no, that's not a reflection of me," 100% wrong. Absolutely, it's a reflection of that potential in you. How could it not be? You're having a dream at that moment, and there's a dream character embodying being nasty, and you're saying, no, that's not part of me. Absolutely, it's part of you, and it's also not part of you. You see, that's the paradox. That's the four valued logic of quantum physics and of Buddhism and of dreaming. And if you identify with one or the other, A or B, no, that's a mistake. It's A and B, even though they mutually are exclusive. That's what quantum physics is pointing at. That's the more expanded point of view.
Well, you'd have to understand that you're part of a collective.
Yeah,
Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. When you realize you step out of the separate self, there's
yeah.
no separation. There's nothing out there.
So the easiest part to understand that is to realize that that is part of the collective that you are part of being
Right. And that's
reflected.
part of you because you're
Yeah.
part of the collective. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what I'm seeing people getting tripped on is that then they over concern themselves, that means actually it's such a fine line and it's really hard to explain. Like, this is really hard to explain without getting lost in it. Is that when you identify yourself as part of the humanity collective, right? Or the consciousness collective, however, because there's layers and layers and layers to the different collectives, then yes, you do see that is part of what you are part of. But if you're trying to deal with your own trauma, you need to identify what is stored within you that is not allowing you to have the freedom to express yourself, because it's your barrier to it. It's
Yeah.
it's creating
Yeah.
a barrier.
That's why one of the main things I always, almost like a heat seeking missile when I work with people, I always inquire into their relationship with their creative process. And typically people, oh, I feel stuck, I feel resistance, I'm not creative. And I'm always like honing in, okay, what's the story right there? What's the belief? What is stopping you from just taking that step into your creativity? And people have all sorts of, I mean, I know I do or
Mm.
did, and so that's a very interesting edge to shed light on.
Yeah, it is, and it is a tripper for people because we get stuck in our own story, and then we can't see the bigger picture. And if you don't understand the picture can then, if you only understand parts of it, it can actually also become part of what I call that controlled evolution energy, where you actually use it to oppress yourself instead
Right,
of liberate yourself.
right.
So I think the main thing to remember is it's very complex, and yet it can be very simplified, but you got to have that foundation of understanding underneath it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
really simple for me because it really gets to, one of the ways of understanding Wetiko is that when Wetiko is in the room, it's not safe to speak. In other words, if I express myself, if I shine my light, I'll get censored, I'll get deplatformed, I'll get attacked, I'll get
Mm.
judged, I'll get demonetized. And so then what happens when we live in a world like that, because I'm describing our world,
Yeah.
we internalize that and we become our own control system. It gets pushed down in the unconscious. And then without our even being aware of it, we actually suppress our own creative expression. And that's when we become sick and develop this dis-ease in the core of our soul. And that's why the profound importance of connecting with our creative voice and our creative expression, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the easiest way to do that is learning to be self-reflective of yourself, and also, really valuing that as much honesty as you can get with yourself. Because that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're training yourself all the time to
Well,
be more and more honest.
the thing about, I'm so glad you said that about self-reflection, because Jung says very clearly in his work, the time we're in is like, the only thing, the most important thing that's needed is self-reflection. And this is why he calls individuation the act of becoming whole and becoming an undivided individual. Individuation is incarnation. That when we self-reflect and when we individuate and when we become ourselves, we have literally offered ourselves as a conduit, as an instrument for the incarnation of the deity. That's what I point out in my work, that unlike 2000, with Christ, 2000 years ago, instead of God incarnating through one human being who's kept spotless and pure, and here's Satan who's embodying the darkness. I mean, just think about that. Here's the light embodiment, here's the darkness. That wasn't an accident that they showed up at the same time. That was expressing symbolically the polarization of the collective psyche
Hmm.
that was going on 2000 years ago. Jung again and again was pointing out, now God is incarnating through creaturely man who partakes of the human shadow. And so, in other words, God is incarnating through the collective unconscious. This is why Rudolf Steiner, I have a big chapter in my new book on the clairvoyant Steiner. He says the most momentous event, the greatest event in our world right now, is the incarnation of the etheric Christ. That Christ isn't incarnating in physical form. Christ is incarnating through physical form, through all of the world, but through the collective unconscious. But Steiner says before that can be actualized, it's going to necessitate an encounter with the beast, with radical evil. And that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what Jung is saying, is that the greater the encounter between God and all of humanity, the greater a collision, an encounter with evil. And that's exactly helping us to contextualize what's happening in our world. That is the Wetiko psychic epidemic. And encoded in that is the most sublime light. That is actually a revelation of our nature, of our creative nature, of our love and of our compassion. But if we don't, just like a symbol in a dream, if you don't get in resonance with the symbol and actually receive it, it doesn't give you any benefit. But
Hmm.
once you actually get in alignment and recognize what is touching in you, then all of a sudden it brings you back to the place that it's an emanation of. Okay? Because a symbol is very different than a sign. It's not a literal thing like one way, do not enter. No, a symbol is an emanation of a deeper reality. When we get in resonance with it, it literally introduces us to that deeper reality. So there's something being revealed to us through the Wetiko epidemic, collectively and individually. And Jung makes the really important point. It's not through collective action that we're going to be able to deal with this. Yeah, that can be helpful to create legislation, but that's only palliative care. It starts with the individual. When any one of us really remembers who we are, recognizes the dreamlike nature, owns our shadow. There are a lot of different ways of saying the same thing. That actually carves a pathway in the collective unconscious, making it easier for all the rest of us to do it. And when, just like the 100th monkey phenomenon, or in the Bible, they talk about 144,000 being the symbolic number, when sufficient number of us begin to wake up and connect with other people who are awakening, that goes viral. And that can, catalyze into a global awakening in which we recognize consciously that we are participating in our own evolution. That's what this is all about. That's what's being
Yes.
offered to us.
Yes, I totally agree. That is the key. So for our listeners out there, if you're looking at evolution and you start dealing with your own emotions, you're actually helping the collective of humanity because you're one less unconscious energy in that system. It's brilliant. So
Yeah, yeah, no,
yeah,
totally. Yeah.
yeah. We're coming close to the end. Would you like to play Flip the Book, which is an intuitive game we've got? There's book 1, 2, or 3. Which book would you like?
Okay, let me pick book 2.
Big book 2. All right. So that's what I refer to as the big book, and it's your insight and awareness book. So you've got pages 1 to 430 to pick. Which
Okay,
page would you like?
237.
And that is actually under the chapter of blueprint, and you have 2 paragraphs to pick from.
Okay, what about the second?
The second. So I'll just read this out and then you just tell me what you think. When you truly feel the conscious energy of your soul and trust your blueprint, you start to trust the whole process of your rise and fall from grace and observe all your experiences as opportunities to learn from life as your soul blueprint intended. When you are conscious of your love for your own soul and truth, your ability to live honestly exposes the reality of being unconditionally loved by truth. Your honesty within the fall from grace will inspire you to keep resolving and evolving, which is the rise with grace. Your honesty allows you to feel the truth of your experiences and the opportunities within your present moment. The more you accept you are on a journey for your soul's resolution and evolution, and the more significance you give the uniqueness of your blueprint, the more you reveal your ability to unconditionally love the truth of your soul and the reality of life.
Mm, wow, beautiful. Well, for me, there's a big chapter in my new book about, the soul, and really what this is about is a battle for our soul. And that's exactly what Jung is pointing at. And because part of Wetiko, when people get taken over, they become like automatons, they become like robots, they become like zombies. And but when we're in touch with our soul, with our heart, in Buddhism it's called the precious bodhicitta, the good heart, with our love, with our compassion, which is with our nature, then we attain the incredible, amazing status of being, indigenous people call it, a human being. And
Yeah.
that's what this is all about, to keep our humanity, to keep our connection with our heart, to deepen our relationship with our soul, to really tap into our love, our compassion, our kindness, our creativity. And in a way, then Watiko has no currency at all with us. So yeah, that's what
Yeah.
it brings up.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, and I think too that we should honor that we do have, their mud maps and the blueprint that o our soul is constantly trying to evolve. Like, that's our life purpose, is to, understand ourselves and to operate from that inner wisdom, which I refer to as your soul
Yeah, yeah.
consciousness.
Well, that's what, in his work, Jung talks about that everything dreams of individuation, which is to say that everything dreams of becoming who one is. It's the
Yeah.
same idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny, I got asked a question the other day, who, 'cause I teach classes on how to be self-reflective, and this, guy asked me, he said, "Who wants to be self-reflective? Who are these people?" And I said, "It's normally people that have been through trauma because they've got the why question and, why me? Why whatever?" And that why question is a door opener. And if you're prepared to open the door and let it take you wherever it goes, all of a sudden you're on an evolutionary process. And there's also those that have just got this innate curiosity. There's still a part of their soul still screaming at them or talking gently. Open the door and start really exploring who you are and what you're part of. And to do that then means you're an active participant of the evolution of yourself, and also that helps humanity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Oh, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I so appreciate the invitation. I've enjoyed it too. Thank you so much.